Winging It is a show by OddBird about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, our certified OOUX professional Sandra will talk to James and me, David, about OOUX and how it helps designers create intuitive websites.
Before getting into OOUX, Sandra, can you tell us from your experience as a UX designer why it's valuable to have an intuitive website or app?
Sure, that's an interesting question. As a designer, you always hear that website should be intuitive. That word is thrown around a lot, and it's not clearly defined usually. Basically, I was doing it by using my intuition to understand what would be intuitive, thinking of myself as a user of a website or an app, and thinking about what would be intuitive, and that's how I was figuring out what to design. Plus, years and years of experience hearing people's feedback. But what I love about OUX system is that it finally gave words, language, definitions to what I was intuiting when I was making intuitive websites. It helped me to be able to articulate exactly what it is that people are looking for when they say that they want an app to be more intuitive. And it gave me clear and specific ways to diagnose the problem when people are saying it's not intuitive. I've also discovered that actually when you're designing a more intuitive website, it's good for the end user, but it's also good for me, the designer. It's just way more efficient. And I can talk more about that later too, if you'd like.
Just to back up a tiny bit, what exactly is OOUX and what do all the letters stand for?
Yeah, okay. OOUX stands for Object Oriented User Experience. And it's a philosophy and a set of principles that helps UX designers break down complexity, understand convoluted business requirements, synthesize all the user research, and facilitate collaboration among stakeholders, subject matter experts, and developers. So that's like the technical definition. But in other words, it's a way of designing digital systems that takes into account the fact that people think in objects first, and they need consistent and recognizable objects in order to understand the environment they're in, whether that's a physical environment or a digital environment.
So, Sandra, can you say a bit more about how people think in objects?
Sure. I have a little demo here that I can show you. So let's pretend you're walking into this bookstore. Um, when you walk in first, can you all tell me what are the first things that you see? What would you describe that you see here?
See a bookshelf,
Books,
Yep,
tables.
chairs.
yep, exactly. So that's what happens when people walk into a space in real life. They identify the objects there first. So a book, a shelf, a table, a chair, a drink, a person. And then after that, they think maybe, ooh, I'd like to read the book or drink a drink or talk to the person. Um, we don't start by saying, I want to talk and then look around and see like who can I talk to? A book or a person? Like that's not how we don't think in verbs first, we think in nouns first. And so that is what we want to do not only in physical spaces but also in digital spaces.
Okay, that makes sense. People think in objects in a digital space just like they do in a physical space.
Mhm.
But does that change the way you do your design work?
Yeah, so here's an example of just a digital space. This is OddBird's Mastodon account. And so just like we had the coffee shop and you think of books, table, person, when you come to a digital space, you're going to think about the person. In this case, it's like actually a company, OddBird, the user, I should say. And then you're going to think about a post that the user OddBird has actually created. Those are some of the examples of objects in a digital space. So, for a really long time, the common sense for how to design user experience is through the flow of a person. How are they going to move through different parts of an application or a website? And we've thought about that in terms of the actions they want to take. Like if they come to a page, what action do they want to take? They want to like navigate somewhere else, so they take the action. And so that has made us think about verbs first. What actions are we taking, instead of on nouns first? And so it's created lots of confusion and like made it actually designing things way more difficult, because we just end up designing those objects that are in our system multiple times because we're not thinking about them as the same object across the entire system. So if we focus on the things that a person wants to interact with, the things the person wants to interact with first, and then we think about all the actions that they might want to do to that object, we'll have a much better system in the end.
Can you give us some specific examples?
Yeah. So the best way to show you some examples is actually to talk about times when it isn't working well, when something is unintuitive. So I'm going to start there. And I love going to the Denver Zoo. They have beautiful animal photography on their website. So not to throw them under the bus, because I love them and they're doing great things, but there's a few things I found when I was looking at their website and trying to interact with it as a person going to the zoo that I thought were unintuitive and they could do a little bit better. So there's different ways that a website or an app could be unintuitive. That includes broken objects, isolated objects, shapeshifters, and masked objects. So we're going to look at some of those. Okay. So just to give you a pop quiz to see how well you're understanding what I'm talking about, if you were to come to a zoo website, what kind of objects, things, nouns, would you expect to be at a zoo website?
Probably animals.
Yep.
Maybe events?
Yep.
In the different parts of the zoo where the animals are.
Yeah, the habitats. Yes, for sure. Yeah, okay. So let's start with the events. So things you want to go and see while you're at the zoo that animals are doing. Maybe they're like feeding the penguins or something and you want to watch that. On the Denver Zoo's website, you can find out about these events right here on the home page in this little section. So this is going to be an example of a broken object, first of all. So here we can see the event names right here: Animal Talk, Harmony Hill, Demonstration, Animal Talk, and also it says Harmony Hill. That's actually the habitat. So that's the location. So the name of the event and the location, the habitat is there. And they have the habitat repeated for some reason in little yellow text as well. And then you can see the time of the event. And I can view some more events. So it looks like some of these events are actually repeated. There's this demonstration of the African penguins at the Pinnacle African Penguin Point at 10:15 a.m. and then also at 3:15. So when I was using this, I really wanted to know quickly one event, one location, and all the different times. And so I looked around to see how I could sort of get a view where I could see this demonstration African penguin with the 10:15 time and the 3:15 time together in one little unit. So I could see all of those times together. And so I wanted to sort or something like that. And I clicked on this date here. That doesn't do anything. I clicked on the names of the events to hopefully see a detail view or something. And I clicked on the times, and there's actually just nothing that you can do to interact with these events here. You can't sort or filter, and you can't get to a detail view to learn more. So that is an example of a broken object.
So if an object is broken or unintuitive, is that something about the object itself? Is it inherent to it, or is it a function of how it's actually designed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it has to do with how it interacts with the rest of the system. So objects are not broken in of themselves, but if you, for example, I can't click on any of these things and do what I want to do. So the interaction there is broken. I experience it as unintuitive. And it's just because of the way that it's integrated into this system in a broken way. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you were to take this and make it into a more intuitive system, what are some of the things you would do?
Yeah. So if I was going to unbreak the brokenness of these events here, what I would probably want to do is add some sorting and filtering actions so that I could, like I was saying, rearrange these. I would maybe want to sort them in order of time or something, or maybe like filter by a single type of event, like just see only the demonstration of the African penguin. Maybe I would want to sort them by the location or filter them. Something like that. That would make them not broken. I could have interactions with them. And even more than that, what I would really love to do is actually be able to click on the event. This seems like a list view, and it doesn't have maybe all the information I would want. And like maybe there's a charge for one of these events or something like that. What are they demonstrating about the African penguin? So some description would be really nice. So what I would love to see here to unbreak this is to be able to click on an event in this list and go to a detail page where I could understand more information about it.
And on the flip side of this, do you have an example of a specific project that you've worked on where you felt like the OOUX approach has helped create a better experience for users?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me go over to. All right, this is the OddBird website, which we lovingly call OddSite. So we actually did a big redesign a while back, and we used OOUX thinking to help us to understand how to redesign this. So whenever Miriam would go to conferences and speak, people would say, "Oh, yes, OddBird, I've heard of that, but what do you do?" Like they just didn't understand even what we did at all. And so when we went through this website again and we designed it based on objects first, what we defined was the kinds of things that we do, the things we offer, the services, the tools, stuff like that. So what happened was we ended up putting those things here in our top navigation because those are the things people want the most. They want to find out what the objects are in the system. So for us, that was, we needed to show the work that we do. So that would be like a project, that would be an object. And then who we did it for would be a client. That would be an object. So the project was Mateco, the client was Salesforce in this case. And then we have services that we offer. That's another object. Web design and development, research and concepting are the specific instances of our services. Another object is we have tools we create that people can use. They're open source tools like Odd Contrast. And then we have talks that we give. So you can get to all of our talks here. And finally, we have posts. And posts have different types. So you can go and watch past Winging It episodes here. These are all the posts, other podcasts that OddBirds have spoken on, articles that we've written. You can see the type of post in this little flag here. And so it's actually a great thing to be able to identify your objects in your system, the things people most want to come to your system to find, and just use those as the top level navigation. That's an extra bonus that makes your site really intuitive and gets people to where they want to go immediately. So it really helped us. Yeah, people stopped asking what you do after we redesigned this. And actually, it was great for SEO. Incidentally, we were not focusing on that. But once we redesigned based on this OUX model, people started calling us that didn't know us at all and had only found us from just doing a Google search.
Okay, it seems like the big picture is kind of organizing information on your website in a way that makes it easier for people to understand what's going on and how to
Mm-hmm.
find the information they're looking for
Mm-hmm.
when they need it.
Yeah.
Um, for someone who's heard you explain the benefits of OUX and wants to get started right away and adapt this in their practice, are there specific tools or software you would use to that someone would need to map these objects?
Great question, because the next episode of Winging It is going to be focused on exactly one of those tools, the one that I find the most useful, and that's called Object Map. And the Object Map is a really powerful tool. You can get started using it even if you only know the basics of OOUX, and it helps you write down and define with all of your team members and stakeholders what those objects are going to be in your system. And then it helps you describe what each of those objects is going to be made of. And an object in a system, in a digital system, is defined as a thing that has structured data. So I was showing you some examples, like the OddBird user on Mastodon. That was an object in a digital system. And OddBird, as a user in that system, has a name, it has a little image, an icon, it has followers and people that are following posts. So a post is also an object. So the object of the OddBird user has a relationship to the object of the post in that system. And so objects have that structured data and they have relationships to other objects in the system. So you try mapping out all of your objects, then you define what they are and their relationships to each other in an object map. And it just is such a powerful tool to help people communicate more effectively and to keep people on the same page throughout the whole project. So we'll get into more of that next time.
Yeah. Just another question. You mentioned that using this approach could possibly lighten the workload for designers.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit more about how that might happen?
Yes. So here we have back at the Denver Zoo again. So we've decided that in our system of the Denver Zoo, we have animals and habitats, and we have events. So if we defined those objects to begin with and then started designing, what would happen is we would just design animals and events one time and not try to design them in each context where they appear. So let me take this event example again and go back to the main page of the Denver Zoo. Here is another view where you see the event list. You see the name of the event and then the place where it's located and then the time. But you see how this is the same exact object in the system, the event, but it's designed differently. So color is a little different, but that's not quite such a big deal. You can have it on a different background, but see how in this situation we have the time is bold and it's white, and then here we have both times together, 10:15 and 3:15, just like I was talking about I wished was in the other view. So they have moved things around here, and they don't have the habitat listed, even though that's super important because it was listed second just under the name of the event in this other view we were in. So see here, like there's that really important name of the place where the event happens, but they've left it out in the other view. And here we have italicized words that are, times that are not bold and they're separated out in the list for some reason. So what's happened here is they've actually designed this event object in two different ways, depending on where it was located. and they've probably kind of forgotten whichever one they designed first. Maybe it was a while ago. Now they're designing it again, and they don't maybe quite remember why they were designing it one way or another, and they don't have it in their mind as an object. It's not the same thing to them, maybe. And so they're designing it in different ways. So they designed it twice. And that can happen. It's really, really common for that to happen, for the same object to be designed in a different way across the system. And that is an unintuitive object. And the name of those is shapeshifters. So they shift their shape depending on where they are. It's one object, but it's changing how it looks depending on where it is. And so if you can avoid doing shapeshifters, then you've just cut down on the amount of work you have to do as the designer. Design it once, you know the name of the event, the location, and the time. It's just always going to be in that order in the list view, and they have the same styling. And so you can design it. It really goes with component libraries so super nicely. Because then once you have your design, maybe your kind of list view, you can make that into a card or something for your component library. And then if you need that list view of that object again, just pull the card in and don't design it again. Yeah.
I've heard you talk about this for at least a couple of years, or for the majority of the time that I've worked with you. Do you have a sense of how widely OOUX is practiced by other designers?
Oh, it's so new, actually. Sophia Brader is the one who really has created this system and has lots of great training courses, a self-paced course and one that you take to get certified in this. If you're really, really into it, I totally recommend this class. More and more people are starting to become aware of it, and you can go and read the testimonials. I mean, just my experience is common. Once you find out about this system, you're just like, why have I not been doing it like this the whole time? It's so much easier. And the first time I was taking a certification class, we were just encountering a really complex project that had lots of objects in it, like 8 or 10 objects, which is a lot actually for a digital system. And they had complex relationships to each other. And so I just have I can't even imagine how we would have done that project without this OUX system and the object map to keep us all on the same page, to name things consistently so that we would know what we were talking about when we were demoing things to the client, and have the shared understanding of what it was we were building. So it's not super widespread yet, but I'm here to say it should be.
Yeah.
As a developer, I've definitely run into the frustration of, oh, I think I already developed this somewhere else, or it's slightly different, and yeah, I've seen that benefit come for our developers as well from objects. So in the shapeshifting example, you had the event in 2 separate places, but is there also room for an event page that would be the same object but a completely different context? How does OOUX account for that?
Yeah. The same object, but a completely different context. Yeah, let me share my screen and talk about that. Okay, so if you have one object and you want to maybe have a list view of it and a detail view of it, it's not going to have all the same information in the list view and the detail view. So let's look at the animals section. Here we have the list view of the animals at the Denver Zoo. Here's our penguin. We can see the name of the penguin, the African black-footed penguin, and the Latin name. James, maybe you know how to pronounce the Latin name, being a birder.
Absolutely.
Or, sorry, not just James, but also David. We have 2 birders here in this conversation. Anyone want to take a stab at the Latin name?
Spiniscus demersus.
Nice.
I'll go with that.
That sounds like a spell from Harry Potter. Okay. So this is the African penguin in the Denver Zoo. And this is the detailed view of that. So it has an image, a name, and a Latin name. If you click on it, this is the detail view of the penguin. So they've done a great job here of making this an intuitive object and not a shapeshifter, because they start with the image at the top. Again, top priority part of the object. Then we have the name. Perfect. That's exactly right. Keep that in the same location of importance relative to the picture, just like the list view. Don't rethink what's important from the list view to the detail view. So there's the name, there's the Latin name, and then tons of other information that you didn't have in the list view. So the most important thing when designing objects in different contexts is that you figure out what the top priority data is that makes up that object. In this case, they decided it was the picture, the name, and the Latin name. And they kept that consistent throughout both contexts. The other thing they should have done here probably was to, here's the habitat information. Let's look and see if you can get to the habitat object that the penguin is in from this page. You absolutely cannot. I don't see it anywhere. Do you see it?
No.
No. So this is another way that an object can be unintuitive if it's isolated. So the habitat and the animal that lives there have a relationship in the real world and in the digital, and you should connect those two things in a system instead of isolating them.
So somewhere on this page, there should be a link that says, the penguin playground at the zoo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So if we can find habitats under animals for some reason, which is a little strange to me, but here's the habitats, and the pinnacle African penguin point is the habitat. So they've actually done a little bit better job here where they actually linked to the animal with the habitat. So this is not broken. This is good, or isolated.
It seems like we could also see what events are happening at that habitat.
It does, doesn't it? And I did not see event in the animal detail or I don't see it here in the habitat. So these are really isolated from each other across the system.
That was a good example.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other questions about that?
You've given us some examples of how OOUX helps with marketing sites. How about more web app oriented or applications? How does OOUX help there?
It's really, really similar. So in the really complex web app that I was mentioning, where we needed to use an object map at OddBird, when I was first learning how to use the OOUX system, it was a machine company, like they would machine parts. And so their clients would place an order. An order was an object. And then they would order a part. A part is an object. So order and a part have a relationship. You need to have a part in the order at some point. And there were quotes then in the system. And so you would just go through and name. There were like, how are you going to make, what tool are you going to use to make that part? That tool name, those tools were in the system so that you could add them and figure out how much it was going to cost to use that tool to make the part that someone wanted. So yeah, it's just all about, it's the same on a website or a web app. You are always trying to figure out what are the nouns, the things that people are going to be interested in interacting with. Then once you define those, you start to figure out what are those things made of and how are they related to each other. And then after that, you can start figuring out, what do I want to do to these objects? And then you can figure out the flow between them. I mean, even figuring out the relationships, you're already figuring out the navigation flow, because like I was saying, you want to not isolate your objects. So Once you figure out you have objects and they have a relationship to each other, that's part of the flow. Make sure you can get from one to the other. But just really thinking about it in a different way than designers have usually used, starting with nouns and then going to verbs.
That's great. Thank you, Sandra. Should we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. If you don't have any other
No.
questions.
Mhm. Well, thank you for all the introduction to intuitive objects and explaining all of that so clearly. And I'm looking forward to part 2 where you go into the object maps. Um, you can visit oddbird.net/winging to access links and resources mentioned on today's show, or to send us feedback and topic requests, or tell us how you use OUX. On the next episode, just as Sandra promised, we'll discuss OUX object maps to improve team communication. If you'd like to support us, please like and subscribe. And if you want more from OddBird, we invite you to check out our newsletter at oddbird.net/oddnews. There'll be more mentions of birds and other work that we're doing here as well. Thank you. And remember, best practice is a conversation. So let's keep talking.